On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Nick Troiano. He is the field director for the Can Kicks Back. Welcome to the program, Nick.
Thanks, Sam, for having me.
So, start off, tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. The Can Kicks Back was launched in November 2012 by a group of young people who've been following the issue of our growing national debt for a few years. And what we've been seeing is Washington continually kick the can down the road and delay tough budget choices. And we realize that can is really our generation and our future. And this campaign is meant for our generation to kick back at Washington by getting more involved and by pressuring our leaders to work together and enact a comprehensive deficit reduction agreement.
Okay, so, and you guys have put out a couple of videos. Let's play the latest one. And this is the one we should say that Matt tweeted out. He had a problem with your video. It's based on the Harlem Shake. Just tell us what we're gonna see. And I have to say that I'm obviously a little bit older. I didn't even know anything about the Harlem Shake. I had no idea that what it was, but I've since Googled and seen what's going on. Just set the table for us.
Sure. I mean, the whole tactic of our campaign is to try to communicate a serious message, but using humor to reach young people. And one way that we do that is sometimes by sort of hopping on viral memes and producing videos. And so this video features former Budget Director Alice Rivlin and former U.S. Comptroller David Walker dancing in this minute and a half sketch where we talk about why young people should care about our national debt.
Okay, great. And so the message is specifically
we can't keep dancing around this issue.
Right, we can't keep dancing around. Okay, let's play the clip.
The Congressional Budget Office's new report shows that our national debt will hit 77% of the gross domestic product by 2023. We can't grow our economy and have a prosperous America with debt growing that fast.
And that will impact young people the most. Fewer jobs, higher taxes, a lower standard of living, more debt. What's going on in Washington is truly outrageous. It's time to shake things up.
You've got to get in.
Harlem Shake.
Okay, I think we get the idea. We're obviously it's an audio show. People can't quite see, but people are dancing around crazy at that point. So now I got to say, starting off, Nick. Now my audience, I know what my audience is thinking right now. They think that you think the argument here is that the number one crisis we face as a country is the debt and the deficit that is adding to that debt, and not a jobs crisis. Is that the case?
Well, I think it's often presented as a false choice. We do have a lot to worry about in the short term in terms of growing the economy, but we can't do that at the expense of ignoring what is the most critical issue facing our generation, which is our unsustainable fiscal path. If we do that, we'll only be setting ourselves up for a more predictable and perhaps more severe economic crisis years down the road if our debt continues to grow as it is. So our message is that we need a bold, generationally balanced, and bipartisan deficit reduction agreement that can both protect economic recovery in the short term and help bring our debt down to a sustainable level over the medium and long term.
Now, how does that happen? I mean, how do you cut our government and create growth at a time where we have such a tremendous, essentially output gap in this country?
Well, one way to do it in terms of growing the economy and reducing the deficit is, an issue that's before the Congress now, is what to do about sort of comprehensive tax reform. We have an antiquated and dilapidated tax code that's over 73,000 pages. There's ways to make it a lot simpler and fairer through closing a lot of loopholes that can help with growing the economy and at the same time generate a bit more revenue to deal with the deficit. And if you couple that with comprehensive entitlement reform, that begins to look like, the next sort of grand bargain package that both sides can agree to.
Now, let me ask you that. But just on those two things, you're talking about tax reform and cutting entitlements. By that you mean Social Security and Medicare. How does cutting Social Security and Medicare, how does that grow the economy?
Well, I think what we'll see is that the economy can't be sustained over the long term with the trajectory of these entitlement programs because of the way that our population is aging and because of the growth rate in healthcare costs.
Well, no, I agree with you on the cost of healthcare costs, but wait a second. But I'm curious as to, right now, you say we can do both these things right now. How does cutting entitlements in the future, and we can talk about whether or not we should do that, but how does that grow jobs now?
What I'm saying is that by making gradual changes in those social insurance programs now, it won't do anything severe to jeopardize our economic recovery, which can be aided and shepherded along through other things that we can do in the short term, including making some needed public investments in infrastructure and education and research. So the advantage of doing deficit reduction in sort of a grand bargain style is that we can make decisions now that will be phased in gradually and at the same time not do anything to jeopardize our economic recovery.
So those aren't necessarily related. I mean, you're not saying that cutting the entitlements will create jobs.
Not in the short term necessarily, but what I'm saying is if we don't do that, then we're only setting ourselves up for our next economic crisis years down the road.
Now,
the sooner that we act, which this is a really important point, the sooner that we act, the less dramatic those changes have to be, and the less people will have to affect.
How will cutting Social Security or cutting Medicare? Now, I think we're in agreement that the number one driver of our long-term deficits is the cost of medicine. It's not necessarily Medicare, except for our obviously that's a program in which we help seniors pay for medicine, but it's the cost of medicine that is the problem, right? I mean, the rate of growth in Medicare, for instance, is much less in terms of cost than it is in the private insurance industry.
Right. So I think you're right about that, but I think the United States is the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a budget for what we spend on healthcare. Right now, it's just growing on autopilot, and that isn't a sustainable, way to budget for government. But at the same time, we just don't want to shift costs to, regular Americans. So we have to do more in terms of reforms that can slow the growth rate of healthcare costs, and we can do that, for example, by using the government's purchasing power to better negotiate prescription drug prices and reforming medical liability insurance. There are still many other things that we can do to build on some of the reforms that were in the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, we can. I would love to see us negotiate for those prescription drug prices. But why does that involve cutting? So you're not proposing cutting benefits to Medicare. You're just talking about changing the way that we pay and maybe heading towards a single payer system.
Well, I think everything has to be on the table to make sure that program is sustainably solvent. We should look at what to do about the age of Medicare eligibility. We should look at means testing the program so that wealthier Americans pay, a larger share of the costs. We have to look at the reimbursement rates to Medicare providers. We have to do all of those things to make sure that program is going to be there for the next generation when we retire and become eligible.
Now, we already do means testing on Medicare Part B, I think it is, and some other aspects of Medicare. But when you talk about raising the eligibility age, aren't you talking about pushing those medical care costs onto ordinary Americans? I mean, because they're still going to have to pay, right? I mean, you're still going to have to pay for your private insurance if you're not on Medicare. And in fact, there's every reason to believe that those costs would go up because you're older. I mean, I know that, I'm not your age. I was at one point. But as I get older, my health insurance costs go up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we're saying is that the way the programs run now isn't sustainable. For every $3, a person gets in Medicare benefits, they only paid $1 into the system. So we need to every reform and every idea to be on the table and developing ways for this program to be solvent, because the worst option that we have is the status quo, especially for young people.
Well, I agree with you.
If we look at what the Medicare board says, that the program is going to stop paying full benefits, in the mid-2020s, what are we going to say then if we don't engage in sensible, gradual reforms now?
Well, I agree. I just don't see how putting people into the private health insurance industry is going to actually save them money. In fact, all the studies that I've seen on this will say that it will increase costs, because ultimately we already pay twice as much as any other nation for health care, and we don't even have a nationalized system. But let's move to Social Security. What's the why does cutting Social Security in any way benefit us?
Again, I think you're framing your question the wrong way. Social Security, the trustees have said the program is going to stop paying full benefits in 2036. So the question is, what can we do now to extend the life of a really important program? And again, there are good ideas that should be out there and on the table. One is sort of raising the cap on taxable wages. It's much lower. It captures much less percentage of national income than it did when Social Security was enacted in the 1930s. Again, we have to look at the retirement age, because when the program was established, the average person died before they started collecting their benefits, and we have to see,
well, that was that. I mean, you got to look at the age increase in longevity after the age of 65, right? I mean, you're talking. A lot of that had to do with infant mortality rates when you're saying that people didn't collect it before they became 65. But if they're alive, they're paying into the system.
Well, certainly people are living a lot longer now than they used to, and certainly
not everybody. I mean, over the age of 65, everybody in the bottom half of the income distribution is living about a year longer. You have a small cohort of people who are living older. I think even for working white men now, or women, I think their age has actually gone down, their life expectancy.
Right, but the things that we're talking about aren't extreme. I mean, in the Simpson-Bowles proposal 2 years ago, their proposal was to increase the retirement age to 68 by 2050 and to 69 by 2075. So we're not talking more than a couple years over the next few decades. What tends to happen is that when you start talking about reforming these entitlement programs, you get a whole bunch of pushback, and the status quo results from that. And then, like I said, the status quos are really our worst option on the table. So I'd really love to hear, what others' ideas are to reform these programs.
If we lift the cap, if we get rid of the cap, we go back to the amount of income that you say has been lost, which we agree on. We're about 75% of the way there, and you could actually just, raise taxes. I mean, we have our lowest amount of income taxes in this country, short of the past 10 years, than we've had essentially since World War II.
Mm-hmm.